And up to 6 minutes, Ms Roddick.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. On complex tasks like setting the budget, I think that people really do want to see politicians from different parties sitting down and working together. So I was really glad to see the Greens and Lib Dems doing exactly that, sitting down with the SNP, working on more money for hospices like the Highland Hospice, giving Orkney Islands Council more flexibility with its settlement and extending free school meals even further. These are all excellent policies, and meanwhile Labour has said they'll abstain. Now, I expect the Tories to oppose the SNP's budget. Listening to the contributions this afternoon, they want tax cuts for the wealthy, while we continue to expect those who have the most to contribute the most. But Labour's early announcement that its MSPs were going to take no interest in deciding how money in Scotland is going to be spent was genuinely surprising to me. We are supposed to believe that Labour is ready for government, but Labour MSPs won't even talk about governing. And I do wonder how much of their resistance to take part in this process is a result of an inability to challenge their London bosses or reconcile their vague calls for a new direction with what their own party has decided to do and say on welfare. Yes, I will.
Michael Marr.
I thank the member for giving way. I can assure her that I met with the Cabinet Secretary and the Finance Secretary on numerous occasions when we had discussions about the direction of the budget. Unfortunately, the request that I was making about a change of direction for Scotland, a new approach to the delivery of public services, was not met. So I can assure the dialogue was there. Unfortunately, they didn't rise to that challenge.
Emma Roddick.
It may have been only a few short weeks ago that Labour announced in the press that it wasn't going to be making any further demands on the Scottish budget, but it was certainly a long enough time for them to negotiate something in the way that other parties have managed to, in a respectful and constructive way. And I do think that a budget that's seeking to mitigate UK Labour's frankly terrible decisions to keep the Tory two-child cap, hike employers' national insurance contributions and remove money from pensioners to support them with heating bills over the winter would be quite an embarrassing one for Labour MSPs to vote against when they're still trying to trick folk into believing that their beliefs are different to Keir Starmer's and not directed by him. And maybe that's why they've decided to sit it out entirely. Because the budget is the biggest opportunity that individual MSPs have to directly influence what the coming year is going to look like and what priorities will be getting the most funding, and they have chosen to abstain. Scotland needs action to protect our communities, public services and pensioners from Labour's disastrous first choices in government. From restoring a universal winter heating payment to looking at how we can mitigate the two-child cap, the Scottish Budget has committed £210 million to directly mitigate Labour's policies. The national insurance hike has terrified everyone from local authorities to social care providers, be it childcare, nursing homes or third sector organisations. And it's likely that the cost to our public services in Scotland will be £700 million. SCVO says that the voluntary sector is likely to see £75 million gone, and culture organisations who are excited about the Scottish Government's uplift to their budgets now worry that much of that new money is going to be swallowed by a tax on jobs. Yes, I will.
Briefly, Michael Marr.
I appreciate the member giving way again. And just she recognise that for those welcome spending commitments and those have to be paid for. And where does she think the money should come from if she's opposed to every other means by which the money was actually raised?
Emma Roddick.
I think the money should come from where it does for every normal independent country, through the revenue and financial powers that we would have if we could take all of our decisions in this place, rather than relying on the whims of a Labour government which is taking with one hand while giving with the other. And I think Scottish Labour MSPs could not come here today and brag about how much money the Scottish Government has to invest in Scotland if they had actually tried to design a budget, because then they'd actually have to look at how much it is costing to undo the damage that UK Labour is doing and how much the national insurance hike is going to cost everyone. Scottish Labour isn't willing to help us protect people from these terrible decisions. They also won't vote for a £2 billion increase in frontline NHS spending. They won't vote for a record £15 billion for local government. They won't vote for concrete action on climate change and an uplift to the culture budget. And it's not because they didn't get their way and they negotiated and didn't get enough. It's because they announced in the press from the off that they were going to abstain without bothering to talk it through first. And I'm not sure what message that is supposed to send to our constituents other than Scottish Labour is aimless, pointless and can't be bothered. And thanks to these commitments to abstain, the SNP didn't actually need to negotiate with other parties. But the Scottish Government has done some grown-up politics, sat down with others anyway and worked out a deal. And that means that this budget is a compromise which recognises the priorities of those across Scotland who didn't vote SNP at the last elections. It is a budget by Scotland for Scotland. And that's why it invests in housing, £768 million to the housing programme to deliver at least 8,000 more homes. And I'm delighted that after engaging with the Cabinet Secretary and her predecessors on the issue, young islanders under 22 will be able to access inter-island ferry transport in the same way that the bus scheme supports mainland kids to use buses. The budget also protects free prescriptions, free university tuition, free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds and eligible 2-year-olds, and NHS free at the point of use. These are not new policies, but be in no doubt that funding for them is not a given. It does depend on who is sitting on that front bench. Last week we heard Scottish Labour dismiss universal free prescriptions as a good headline. And every other month somebody suggests that privatisation might be a good thing for the NHS. Now, I don't remember a Scotland without an SNP government, and we have always remained steadfast in our commitment to these policies. So I understand that people are used to them, maybe even take them for granted, but we can't. If you value these things, remember who delivered them for the best part of 2 decades, and remember what we've managed to do with the limited powers of devolution, and imagine what we could do with the full powers of an independent country.
Thank you. Before calling the next speaker, just to advise the Chamber